The crowd's roar reached a fever pitch as the gladiator's sword found his opponent's throat. Blood sprayed across the sand of the Colosseum, mixing with the dirt to form a dark mud that would be raked away before the next bout. The victor raised his arms in triumph, soaking in the adulation of 50,000 screaming Romans who'd bet money, reputation, and pride on his survival. But the show wasn't over. Not yet. Because what happened next? In the tunnels beneath the arena, in the holding cells where female prisoners waited in terror, in the private chambers where wealthy sponsors exercised their rights. That's the part Roman historians deliberately omitted from their accounts. I need to stop you right here before we go further. This isn't going to be the sanitized version of Roman gladiatorial games you learned in school. This isn't Russell Crowe fighting honorably for his freedom. This is the actual documented horror of what happened to women, prisoners of war, criminals, slaves, sometimes even free women accused of crimes, who found themselves in the Roman arena system. The Romans were meticulous record keepers. They documented everything: tax receipts, military campaigns, building projects, legal proceedings. But when it came to the systematic sexual violence that was built into the gladiatorial system, the official records go suddenly, suspiciously silent. We have to piece together what actually happened from fragments. Graffiti in Pompeii, private letters that survived by accident, medical texts describing injuries, Christian martyrdom accounts, and the occasional honest testimony from sources like Juvenal and Martial, who were willing to acknowledge what everyone knew, but no one wanted to say publicly. What emerges is a picture of institutionalized sexual violence on a scale that's difficult to comprehend. The gladiatorial games weren't just about combat entertainment. They were about dominance, humiliation, and the systematic degradation of Rome's enemies and outcasts. And women prisoners bore the worst of it in ways that Roman society considered so normal, so unremarkable, that they barely bothered to document it. Let me show you what actually happened when the crowds went home and the arena's underground became a chamber of horrors that Rome tried very hard to forget. Beneath the Colosseum, in a network of tunnels and cells that archaeologists call the hypogeum, hundreds of people waited for their turn in the arena. Gladiators, yes, but also criminals condemned to death, prisoners of war, exotic animals, and women who'd been captured in Rome's endless military campaigns, women accused of crimes, women who were simply in the wrong place when Roman soldiers came through. These women weren't there to fight. Rome occasionally featured female gladiators, the gladiatrix, but these were rare novelty acts, usually involving free women who volunteered for fame and money. The women in the holding cells were different. They were ad bestias, condemned to the beasts, or worse, reserved for what the Romans euphemistically called spectacles. A Christian text from the 3rd century CE, the Passion of Perpetua and Felicitas, provides rare insight into what women prisoners experienced. Perpetua was a young noblewoman arrested for Christianity. Her account, written while imprisoned, describes the holding cells. We were in the dungeon in total darkness. I was terrified, for I had never experienced such darkness. The heat was stifling, the crowding intense. The soldiers would extort money from prisoners for the privilege of being moved to a better part of the prison. I was nursing my baby, who was weak from hunger. But Perpetua was relatively privileged. She had family who could pay bribes, a crime Christianity, that didn't automatically include sexual humiliation, and a story important enough that someone bothered to preserve it. Most women in those cells had none of those protections. We know from other sources what happened to unprotected female prisoners. Seneca the Younger, writing about the moral degradation of Roman entertainment, mentions it almost casually. The virgin is reserved for the gladiator, the matron for the lanista, gladiator trainer. They are violated before they are killed. That single sentence, buried in a philosophical treatise about Roman moral decay, describes a systematic practice. Women prisoners were sexually assaulted by gladiators, trainers, guards, and wealthy patrons before being sent into the arena to die. This wasn't occasional criminal behavior. It was policy, so routine that Seneca mentions it as a known fact requiring no explanation. The logistics were organized with Roman efficiency. After gladiatorial combat ended, victorious gladiators would be taken to recover, to have wounds treated, to rest. But before the medical care, before the rest, they would be given access to female prisoners as a reward for their victory. This served multiple purposes in Roman thinking. It rewarded the gladiator, it humiliated the prisoners, especially prisoners of war from defeated enemies, and it reinforced Roman dominance. When a German or Dacian woman was raped by gladiators before being executed in the arena, it was a statement about Roman power over conquered peoples. The holding cells where this occurred were designed with this purpose in mind. Recent archaeological work in the Colosseum's hypogeum has identified small chambers off the main corridors, too small to hold animals or stage equipment, with hooks in the walls at heights consistent with restraining human prisoners. These weren't holding cells. They were assault chambers, architecturally incorporated into the arena's design. Roman legal and cultural concepts around sexuality were fundamentally different from modern Western norms. Romans didn't think about consent the way we do. They thought about dominance and submission, about who had the right to use whom. Roman men of the citizen class had essentially unlimited sexual access to slaves, prisoners, and defeated enemies of either gender. This wasn't considered assault or abuse. It was considered a natural expression of Roman superiority. The Latin verb violare, to violate, wasn't about consent. It was about taking something that belonged to someone else without permission. If the woman was a slave or prisoner, meaning she belonged to Rome, then by definition, a Roman citizen couldn't violate her. Gladiators occupied a complex legal status. They were infamous, people without legal standing, essentially non-persons in Roman law. Most were slaves or condemned criminals. But victorious gladiators, especially those who survived multiple contests, achieved a kind of celebrity status that gave them social power despite their legal powerlessness. The victor's rights system exploited this contradiction. Gladiators couldn't legally own property or make contracts, but they could be rewarded with temporary access to female prisoners. The lanista, the manager who owned the gladiators, or the editor, the sponsor of the games, would grant this access as an incentive for good performance. Graffiti from Pompeii, preserved by the volcanic eruption of 79 CE, provides disturbing evidence of how normalized this was. On the walls of a building identified as gladiatorial barracks, archaeologists found inscriptions boasting about sexual conquests. One reads, "Celadus the Thracian makes all the girls sigh." Another, "Crescens the net fighter holds the hearts of all the girls." These sound almost romantic until you understand the context. Gladiators had no opportunity for romantic relationships with free women. These girls weren't admirers, they were prisoners, slaves, and condemned women who had no choice in the matter. The graffiti is boasting about assault, written with the casual pride of someone describing a sport or hobby. The system was self-reinforcing. Gladiators who fought well were rewarded with women. This incentivized brutality in the arena. The more savagely you killed your opponent, the better your reward. And it created a culture within the gladiatorial schools where sexual violence was normalized as part of the training and lifestyle. A papyrus fragment from Egypt, dating to the 2nd century CE, contains what appears to be a training manual for gladiators. Amid instructions on sword technique and shield positioning is a section on maintaining aggression that explicitly recommends sexual dominance as a way to keep gladiators psychologically primed for violence. The logic was brutally simple. Men who were regularly committing sexual violence would be more comfortable with violence in general, more willing to kill in the arena, more valuable as entertainment. The systematic assault of female prisoners wasn't a side effect of the gladiatorial system. It was a deliberate feature designed to produce more effective killers. What happened in the holding cells was hidden, known but not acknowledged. What happened in the arena itself was performed as public entertainment. Roman games included a category of execution called fatal charades, condemned criminals forced to reenact mythological scenes that ended in their deaths. And many of these scenes involved sexual violence performed in front of 50,000 cheering spectators. The most infamous example comes from Suetonius's biography of Nero, describing games the emperor sponsored. He had a special liking for watching criminals being torn to pieces by wild beasts or being forced to enact mythological scenes. One such spectacle showed the myth of Pasiphae, where a woman prisoner was enclosed in a wooden cow and violated by a bull before being torn apart. Modern scholars initially thought this passage was exaggeration or propaganda against Nero. Then archaeologists excavating arena sites found the mechanical apparatus described: collapsible wooden frames designed to restrain human beings in positions where animals could be directed to attack or mount them. These weren't rare imperial excesses. They were recurring elements of arena entertainment, documented across the empire and across decades. A mosaic from Tunisia shows a woman bound and presented to a leopard. An inscription from Spain advertises games featuring exotic beasts and the punishment of barbarian women. Martial's epigrams reference these spectacles casually, assuming his readers knew what he was talking about. The mechanics were organized with chilling efficiency. Female prisoners would be stripped, bound to frames or posts, and positioned in the arena. Then animals, bulls, horses, sometimes exotic animals like giraffes or elephants, would be driven toward them through the use of fire, noise, or trained handlers. What happened next was presented as mythological reenactment or divine punishment, but it was public sexual assault and murder performed as entertainment for families, tourists, and children. Christian sources provide the clearest descriptions because Christian martyrs were often subjected to these spectacles. The account of Blandina, a Christian slave woman martyred in Lyon in 177 CE, describes her being hung on a post in the form of a cross, exposed as prey to wild beasts. She survived that particular ordeal, only to be killed later in more conventional animal combat, but her account reveals how systematically these exhibitions were designed. The crowd's reactions to these spectacles varied. Some sources suggest discomfort. Seneca complains about the coarseness of audiences who enjoyed such things. But the games continued for centuries, suggesting that enough Romans found them entertaining to keep producing them. This creates a disturbing picture of Roman society, a civilization that produced magnificent art, sophisticated philosophy, and advanced engineering, simultaneously treating the systematic sexual brutalization and murder of women as family-friendly public entertainment. Not all the horror was public. Wealthy Romans who sponsored the games, the editors, had private access to the arena facilities and everyone in them. This included the female prisoners. Gladiatorial games were extraordinarily expensive to produce. Sponsors did it for political advancement, to celebrate military victories, to honor dead relatives, or simply to display their wealth. In return for their investment, they expected certain privileges, including first access to the arena's resources. A legal text from the Digest, compiled in the 6th century CE from earlier Roman legal writings, includes a disturbing clause about property rights. An editor has the right to dispose of condemned prisoners as he sees fit before their scheduled execution, provided that their deaths occur on the appointed day. Dispose of is doing a lot of work in that sentence. In practice, it meant wealthy sponsors could take female prisoners to private chambers beneath or near the arena and do whatever they wanted before sending them to their deaths. We know these chambers existed. Archaeological excavations of arena sites across the Roman Empire have found small, luxuriously appointed rooms near the hypogeum. These rooms have couches, decorative mosaics, ventilation systems, and locks on the inside rather than the outside, designed to keep people out, not in. They're not holding cells or storage rooms. They're private spaces where arena sponsors could engage with prisoners away from public view. A letter preserved in the correspondence of Pliny the Younger, a Roman administrator and writer, references this practice obliquely. He's writing to a friend about producing games. I have secured excellent criminals for the beast shows and acceptable specimens for the private entertainment. All has been arranged according to your preferences and within your budget. Private entertainment involving criminals who would later be killed in beast shows. The euphemism is transparent once you understand the context. The psychological mechanism that allowed wealthy, educated Romans to participate in this system is worth examining. These weren't monsters in the modern sense. They were civic leaders, military heroes, philosophers, poets. Pliny the Younger wrote beautiful letters about love, nature, and friendship. He also casually arranged for women to be delivered to private chambers for sexual assault before their execution. The cognitive dissonance was resolved through Roman categorical thinking. These women weren't really people, not in the legal and social sense Romans understood. They were criminals, barbarians, or enemies. Their deaths were already decreed by law or custom. What happened to them before death was irrelevant because they had no rights, no legal standing, no personhood that Roman law recognized. This dehumanization was so complete that Romans barely bothered to document it. It was like documenting what you did with agricultural implements or livestock. These women were resources to be used before disposal, nothing more. If this practice was so normalized, so widely accepted, why isn't it prominently featured in Roman histories? Why do we have to reconstruct it from fragments and implications rather than clear statements? The answer reveals something important about Roman self-conception. Romans wanted to see themselves, and wanted to be seen by history, as civilized, rational, governed by law. The systematic sexual brutalization of prisoners contradicted that self-image. So it was practiced widely but discussed carefully. It happened in semi-private spaces, the holding cells beneath the arena, the private chambers of the wealthy, the gladiatorial barracks. It was referenced obliquely in literature, using euphemisms and implications. And when Christian writers later criticized it explicitly, Roman defenders didn't deny the practice, but rather argued that it was justified by the prisoner's crimes or status. This pattern of acknowledged but unspoken practice appears throughout Roman history regarding sexual violence. Romans were relatively open about sexuality in general, but specifically, the systematic assault of powerless people was treated as a fact too ordinary to require extensive comment. The Christian takeover of the Roman Empire in the 4th century CE complicated this further. Christian writers wanted to emphasize Roman paganism's moral failures, so they sometimes exaggerated Roman cruelty. But they also faced pressure to downplay or sanitize Roman history as the Church became intertwined with Roman power structures. The result is a historical record that's deliberately obscure about practices that were widely known at the time. We have more detailed records about Roman plumbing than about sexual violence in the arena system, not because Romans cared more about plumbing, but because violence against women prisoners was simultaneously too routine to document and too uncomfortable to discuss openly. Modern scholarship has been slow to address this, partly because of historiographical traditions that emphasized Roman achievements in law, engineering, and military organization, while downplaying or ignoring the systemic cruelties of Roman society. The gladiatorial games were studied as sporting events, as political theater, as cultural phenomena, but not as mechanisms of institutionalized sexual violence. That's beginning to change. Archaeological work in arena sites, renewed attention to fragmentary sources, and willingness to read between the lines of euphemistic Roman texts are producing a more complete picture of what actually happened. And what happened was horror on an industrial scale, normalized, systematized, and built into the architecture and economics of Rome's most popular form of public entertainment. This wasn't a brief historical aberration. The Roman gladiatorial system operated for approximately 700 years, from the 3rd century BCE to the 5th century CE. Arena games occurred throughout the empire, in major cities and provincial towns, producing a cumulative toll that's impossible to calculate precisely but clearly enormous. Conservative estimates suggest that over 4 million people died in Roman arenas during this period. How many were women, and what percentage of those women experienced sexual violence before death? We can't know exactly. But if even a small fraction of female prisoners were subjected to the practices documented in our fragmentary sources, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of victims over the span of Rome's arena history. The practice declined gradually rather than ending abruptly. Christian emperors beginning in the 4th century CE banned some of the more explicitly sexual spectacles, but gladiatorial combat and animal shows continued for another century. Private access to prisoners was harder to regulate and likely continued in some form, even after official games ended. The last recorded gladiatorial combat occurred in 435 CE. But the architecture of violence, the amphitheaters themselves, remained standing, were sometimes repurposed, and in cases like the Colosseum, became monuments that obscured the suffering that occurred within them. The story of what happened to female prisoners in the Roman arena system is difficult to tell and difficult to hear. It forces us to confront the fact that one of history's most admired civilizations built systematic sexual violence into its most popular form of entertainment. This isn't about condemning Romans from a position of modern moral superiority. Every era has its blind spots and cruelties. It's about understanding that the gladiatorial games weren't just about combat. They were about dominance, humiliation, and the systematic degradation of anyone Rome classified as less than human. The women who suffered in those arena dungeons, who were assaulted by victorious gladiators, who were brutalized for public entertainment, who were treated as resources to be used before disposal, they left almost no record. We don't know their names, their stories, their experiences in their own words. What we have are fragments, architectural evidence of assault chambers, casual references in elite Roman texts, graffiti boasting of conquest, legal documents treating human beings as disposable property, and the occasional horrified testimony from sources like Christians who were themselves victims of the arena system. From these fragments, we can reconstruct a practice that Rome tried hard to hide, not because Romans were ashamed of it, but because acknowledging it explicitly would contradict their self-image as the civilizers of the world. The truth is darker and more complex. Rome was simultaneously sophisticated and brutal, artistic and sadistic, legally minded and systematically cruel. The same civilization that produced Marcus Aurelius's philosophy also produced industrial-scale sexual violence performed as public entertainment. Remembering this doesn't diminish Rome's genuine achievements. It contextualizes them. It reminds us that human societies are capable of normalizing enormous cruelty when that cruelty serves the interests of power and when victims are successfully dehumanized. The horror Rome tried to hide wasn't an aberration. It was built into the foundation of their entertainment industry, encoded in their legal system, architecturally incorporated into their greatest monuments. And now, pieced together from the fragments they left behind, we can finally acknowledge what everyone in Rome knew, but no one wanted to say, that when the crowds went home and the arena went dark, the real horror was just beginning for women prisoners who would never see another dawn.